Keung was a notorious robber and kidnapper from Hong Kong in the late 20th century. From his criminal activities, he amassed over 2 billion Hong Kong dollars, which is about 250 million US dollars. It's important to note that this was the value of money in the 1990s. Keung obtained all that money through robberies and kidnapping some of the wealthiest people in Hong Kong. He was known by the nickname Big Spender because of his love for a luxurious lifestyle and expensive items. Cheung was also portrayed as a kind-hearted rogue, as he shared most of his criminal earnings with family, friends, and even strangers. Hello good people, thank you for clicking on this video. Welcome back to the Asian Crime Story channel. It's me Arya, your narrator for today. If you enjoy listening to criminal stories presented in a storytelling style, please subscribe to this channel. Keung was born in Yulin City, Guangxi Province, China, on April 17, 1955. In 1959, when he was 4 years old, he and his parents moved from mainland China to Hong Kong in search of a better life. Upon arriving in Hong Kong, they found that it was not as wonderful as people had described. There weren't many job opportunities available, especially for those without adequate skills and educational qualifications. Eventually, Cheung's father could only make a living by opening a small herbal tea stall. Since they didn't have enough money, the Cheung family rented a small flat in a slum and unsafe neighborhood. Most of the residents of the area were illegal immigrants, manual laborers earning little, women working in prostitution, and gang members who frequently went to jail. Unfortunately, due to their busy activities trying to provide for their children, Cheung's parents didn't have time to look after and supervise them. Keung, who was completely disinterested in education, often skipped school and spent his life on the streets. By the age of 12, he had already joined a gang. At 16, he was imprisoned for stabbing someone. Meanwhile, in another place, there was a girl raised in conditions 180 degrees different from Cheung's. She was Luo Yanfang, better known by her English name, Maggie. Maggie was born in 1964, 9 years younger than Cheung. She was raised in a middle-class family in Hong Kong with stable financial circumstances. Her father was a teacher, while her mother was a private employee. They raised Maggie to be a well-behaved and educated girl, hoping that one day she would follow in her father's footsteps and become a teacher. These expectations were not difficult for Maggie, as she was, in fact, very intelligent and always at the top of her class. After graduating high school at 16, Maggie went on to college, majoring in education, and graduated at 20. Through her father's connections, Maggie secured a position as a teacher at a private school. If she not met Cheung, her life could have been predicted to follow a similar path to her parents, a normal life that was stable and comfortable. However, the fact is that Maggie, the model student and daughter, fell in love with Cheung, the uneducated delinquent. After Cheung was released from prison, his father stepped in to help him get back on the right path. He took him to a friend who was a tailor. Cheung then worked and apprenticed there. From the outside, it seemed that Cheung was working and learning well, but in reality, he returned to his gang and continued engaging in illegal activities. At one point, Cheung even recruited his boss from the tailoring shop to work for him. In '84, Maggie, who had just started working as a teacher, wanted to have her work clothes altered. She visited a nearby tailoring shop and met Cheung. After a few encounters, Maggie began to take an interest in Cheung, and vice versa. From the start, Cheung liked Maggie, so in short they began to date. Their relationship developed very quickly. Maggie was truly smitten with Cheung, but unfortunately, her parents disapproved of the relationship. After all, which parents would want to see their child dating a low-quality young man like Cheung? Maggie ignored her parents' objections and was determined to marry Cheung. After they married in '86, Cheung quit his job at the tailoring shop and intended to use his savings to start his own business, but Cheung was not cut out for business and didn't know what to venture into. By 88, when all his savings had run out, Cheung felt frustrated living a mundane life. One day, he returned home and confessed to his wife, saying, "I was once in a gang, and I want to go back to the gang and do something big. I can't stand live an ordinary life like this." Cheung thought Maggie would be angry and oppose his wishes, but to his surprise, the next moment Maggie smiled and said softly, "My love, I will support every choice in your life." With the support of his wife, Keung began to look for quick ways to make money. One day in 1989, Cheung came home with a woman named Ai. He told Maggie that Ai was his friend and would be staying with them for a while. Cheung also mentioned that he and Ai had a big plan to make a lot of money, but he needed Maggie's help. Cheung asked his wife to quit her current job and join his plan. Although Maggie initially felt a little jealous of Ai's presence, she ultimately chose to trust and accept her husband's proposal, resigning from her job as a teacher, because Maggie rarely saw her husband so excited, and somehow, she felt their fate would dramatically change. A few days later, Ai took Maggie to Won Security Company to interview for a position in the logistics department. Won Security was primarily responsible for securing transportation and safeguarding valuable items for their clients, which usually included banks and financial companies. As a secretary, Ai knew when there were a vacant at the company. The position Maggie was applying for was crucial, as it would give her access to transportation information, including the types of goods being transported and their routes. After just one day at the company, Maggie could grasp the outline of her husband's called big plan. When she returned home that night, she informed Cheung that she could guess what he was planning, and she asked if her guess was correct. This surprised and amazed Cheung, as he had never shared any details about his plans with her before. Because Maggie had successfully guessed his plan, Keung went on to detail it further. After listening attentively, Maggie pointed out the weaknesses in Cheung's plan one by one, even revising certain aspects based on what she had learned from the security company. Finally, Maggie told her husband that she would inform Cheung when the right time for their action would come. At the beginning of 1990, a truck belonging to Won Security, assigned to transport gold Rolex watches to Kai Tak Airport, was robbed by a group of people, resulting in material losses of over 3 million Hong Kong dollars, equivalent to approximately $380,000. Once again, it's important to note that this was the value of money in the 1990s. The robbers were none other than a gang led by Keung. However, even though he had been identified as one of the suspects, the case ultimately remained unsolved due to a lack of direct evidence. The success of this major heist made Cheung feel that Maggie was the key to his success, deepening Keung's love for her. They used the money obtained from the first robbery as initial capital for their next operations, while continuing to hide and wait for the next opportunity to come. During this period, Cheung sold the stolen gold watches on the black market. He used the money to purchase weapons and ammunition. He also began to recruit more trusted gang members as his accomplices. Meanwhile, Maggie invested most of her share by buying stocks and properties, a decision that proved effective, as she earned substantial profits from her investments. At the same time, Maggie still working at the security company to monitor the company activities. On July 12, 1991, another opportunity arose. A bank in Hong Kong needed to transport a large sum of cash to the United States, and they entrusted Won Security Company with the task of transporting cash totaling 170 million Hong Kong dollars, or approximately $20 million. A truck belonging to Won Security, equipped with weapons, was scheduled to carry the money to Kai Tak Airport. Maggie, who received this information from her superior, noted all the details and began planning how to rob the cash truck with her husband. On the day of the cash escort, just as the money truck entered the warehouse area at Kai Tak Airport, Cheung and 4 armed accomplices appeared in front of the cash truck and quickly incapacitated the guards. They then drove the money truck away along the predetermined escape route. Although the Hong Kong police deployed significant resources to handle this case, unfortunately, all three cash escorts were blindfolded at the time, so they could not provide any information, and no valuable clues were found at the scene. Cheung then entrusted the dirty money from this robbery to his wife for laundering. Carefully, Maggie bought several houses and luxury cars with the cash, leaving only a small amount to keep at home. It is important to note that the stolen cash had consecutive serial numbers and had not yet been recorded in the system. Based on these details, the police immediately contacted all banks in Hong Kong, requesting them to monitor closely any cash deposit transactions with the sequential serial numbers. This time, due to Maggie's negligence, Cheung was apprehended by the police. In September 1991, a bank reported to the police that a woman had deposited 400,000 Hong Kong dollars in cash at their branch, and the cash bore sequential serial numbers. The woman making this deposit was none other than Maggie. The police quickly began their investigation into Maggie and discovered that she worked at one security company. Furthermore, it became known that Maggie was the wife of Keung, a man with an extensive criminal record whose name was linked to a previous major robbery. The couple was swiftly arrested, but they never admitted to being involved in the robbery. Fortunately, one of the cash escorts who had been blindfolded provided testimony. At that time, the blindfold slipped slightly due to sweat, allowing him to see Cheung's face through a gap. At that moment, the other four robbers were wearing masks and hoods, except for Cheung, and this cash escort was able to identify Cheung as one of the robbers. Thanks to this testimony, Cheung was ultimately found guilty by the court and sentenced to 18 years in prison. Meanwhile, Maggie was released in court due to a lack of evidence. After Cheung was imprisoned, Maggie immediately hired two experienced high-priced lawyers and filed an appeal for Cheung's case, arguing that Cheung had never confessed to any guilt from the beginning. However, in the end, they were unable to win the appeal. Maggie then sought other ways to help her husband. After discussing with her lawyers, she decided to leverage the power of the media to pressure the Ministry of Justice. Maggie contacted several mainstream media and held a public press conference, where she tearfully claimed that her husband, Cheung, had been criminalized. The only incriminating witness against Cheung was a cash escort officer. According to Maggie, when the escort officer identified the suspect the first time, he couldn't identify Cheung because his eyes were blindfolded during the robbery. However, during the second identification opportunity, the escort officer suddenly claimed that his blindfold had slipped slightly, and he pointed to Cheung as one of the robbers. Maggie questioned the authenticity of this testimony, and wondered whether the police had orchestrated the escort officer's statement. Maggie continued to cry, stating that the police were eager to close the case, and had forced a confession through torture. She then lifted her skirt in front of the cameras, revealing a long scar on her inner thigh, claiming that the wound was inflicted by the police during her interrogation. In her closing statement, Maggie said that her husband was innocent, and expressed her hope of obtaining the justice that he deserved. During her press conference, Maggie positioned herself as a victim to garner sympathy. She cried and condemned the brutality of the Hong Kong police. Maggie's performance quickly sparked discussion among the people of Hong Kong. Under the pressure of public opinion, Cheung was eventually released from prison, without any criminal charges. As he walked out of the courtroom, Cheung celebrated his victory toward the waiting media cameras. Maggie and Cheung's victory was absolute. Not only did they successfully evade punishment for the major robbery, but a few days later, Maggie filed a lawsuit against the Hong Kong police, seeking compensation for her husband's unjust detention for 3 years. The court granted the lawsuit, and the Hong Kong police were ordered to pay the couple 10 million Hong Kong dollars in compensation. After being released from prison, Cheung drove his yellow Lamborghini, and showed reporters the scars on his chest, which were the result of coercive confessions made in the interrogation room. His victory in this legal battle led Cheung to regard Maggie as his lucky charm. Cheung specifically traveled to Thailand to seek a sculptor, asking him to carve several statues of the goddess of luck, using his wife's face as the original model. He then placed these statues in his home, believing they would bring him blessings. From that point on, Cheung became increasingly greedy and daring. It is said that at one point, he met Jackie Chan at a party. Cheung immediately got the idea to kidnap Jackie Chan, but a friend of his, who was also a friend of Jackie Chan, persuaded him not to go through with the idea. Keung squandered his money on gambling and other vices, but at the same time, he also distributed his wealth to many people. For example, he would give large tips to hotel staff, donate to charities and social shelters, or even hand money to passing beggars. One day, his associates asked Cheung about their next robbery plan. While looking through a financial magazine, Cheung pointed his finger at a page containing a list of the 10 wealthiest people in Hong Kong, and said, "Let's kidnap them, one by one." After everything that happened to Cheung, due to his last robbery, Maggie felt that they should not get involved in the next criminal act together. She thought that if anything bad happened, she would hire a lawyer to free Cheung, just like before, and she would take care of their children. Cheung agreed with Maggie's suggestion and fully trusted her. From then on, he would act to earn money in his own ways, and give it to Maggie to keep safe. In May 1996, less than a year after Cheung was released from prison, he and his associates began to devise a plan to kidnap Victor Lee, the eldest son of Lee Ka-shing. At that time, even up to now, Lee Ka-shing remained at the top of the list of the 10 wealthiest people in Hong Kong as ranked by a financial magazine. Cheung sent his men to study Victor Lee's daily routine and observe his regular movements. After careful consideration, Cheung decided to kidnap Victor as he was returning home from work. Cheung chose a narrow one-way turn, not far from Victor's home as the kidnapping location. However, before they could execute their plan, Cheung and his gang faced an unexpected situation. Among Cheung's accomplices were several fugitives from Hong Kong who had been hiding in mainland China. These individuals could not enter Hong Kong through customs as their names were listed as fugitives, so they had to sneak into Hong Kong using a fishing boat. Once they landed, they encountered 2 police officers patrolling near the harbor. The officers initially assumed they were illegal immigrants and approached them to check their identification cards. The gang members knew that an ID check would lead to their arrest, so one of them, Yi Jihuan, decided to resist. Yi Jihuan was the first armed robber in Hong Kong's history to use an AK-47. He had been on the run for the past 3 years and had been hiding in mainland China. Yi Jihuan informed the police officers that he would retrieve his ID, but he suddenly turned around, drew the weapon he was carrying, and aimed it at the officers, forcing them to face the wall. Yi Jihuan ordered his associates to escape first. After that, he also tried to flee, but the police shot him twice, with one bullet hitting his lower back and the other hitting his leg. Yi Jihuan's associates managed to escape and reunited with Keung, but Yi Jihuan was captured and taken to Queen Mary Hospital for treatment. After checking his fingerprints, the police discovered that this man was Yi Jihuan, the most wanted criminal with a bounty of 1 million Hong Kong dollars on his head. All personnel in the Hong Kong police were immediately put on alert, because Yi Jihuan and his associates had returned to Hong Kong. Despite Yi Jihuan's refusal to admit anything, the police were convinced that his purpose for coming to Hong Kong was not for leisure. Yi Jihuan and his gang were surely planning a major crime. As a result, the Hong Kong police heightened their vigilance. Unfortunately, they mistakenly believed that Yi Jihuan and his associates were planning a grand robbery, whereas in reality, Yi Jihuan and Keung were plotting to kidnap the child of the richest person in Hong Kong. Even though his associate had been captured, Cheung decided to go ahead with the plan to kidnap Victor Lee as scheduled. At 5 p.m. on May 23, 1996, Victor left his office and entered his blue Nissan President. In Hong Kong, almost everyone knew that it was Victor's car. However, this very recognition led him into danger. When Victor's car exited the company parking lot, Cheung's associates called him to report that their target was out. Cheung then prepared at the kidnapping location with 2 other cars. As Victor's car approached, Cheung immediately sped past and stopped in front of it, while the 2 other cars blocked from behind. The kidnappers pointed their weapons and ordered Victor's driver to open the door, but the driver refused. Eventually, one of the kidnappers managed to break the front window with a hammer. The kidnappers dragged Victor and his driver into their vehicle and took them to an abandoned chicken farm. The entire kidnapping process took only 10 minutes. Once they were in the car, Keung ordered Victor to call his father. Victor called Keung, informing him that he had been kidnapped and requesting that his father not contact the police. Cheung felt very pleased, knowing that a large sum of money would soon be within his grasp. When the car arrived at the chicken farm, Cheung pulled Victor out of the vehicle and kissed the man's forehead, saying to his associates, "Victor is our money, so take good care of him." Cheung then went to Keung's house alone to demand the ransom. His associates thought it was unsafe for Cheung to go alone, but Cheung replied, "For the poor, money is more important than life, while for the rich, life is more important than money." For Keung, his eldest son was far more valuable than money, so he would not risk his son's life for a sum that was insignificant to him. Upon learning that his son had been kidnapped, Keung immediately took a helicopter home and waited for the kidnappers. Soon after, Keung arrived. According to Cheung's later confession, when he entered Keung's house, he introduced himself and stated his purpose. Cheung then deliberately wanted to ensure whether Keung had called the police, so he said to Keung, "Tell all the police hiding in your house to come out." Keung replied that he had not contacted the police. He then took Cheung to inspect every inch of his home, floor by floor, even opening locked rooms for Cheung to check. And as it turned out, there were indeed no police officers in Keung's house. Cheung and Keung then began discussing the ransom amount for Victor's release. Cheung demanded cash totaling 2 billion Hong Kong dollars within 3 days. Keung stated that he needed to consult with the bank. He then called a bank manager in front of Cheung and said, "I need cash within 3 days. What's the maximum amount you can gather?" The bank manager replied that within 3 days, all the banks in Hong Kong could only gather 1 billion in cash. Cheung listened to their conversation the entire time. After Keung hung up the phone, he said, "It's not that I don't want to give you 2 billion, but the bank doesn't have that much." Seeing Cheung hesitate, Keung added, "Well, I have 40 million in cash at home, I can give you this amount up front." Upon hearing this, Cheung smiled and said, "Agreed, 1 billion is enough." He then took out 2 million from the 40 million and handed it back to Keung, saying that he only wanted 1 billion and 38 million because the number 4 is considered unlucky in China. Cheung was a superstitious gambler. In addition to avoiding the number 4, he also did other things to enhance his luck. For example, before each robbery, he would ask all his accomplices not to engage in sexual encounters. After a successful heist, he would always throw some money onto the streets to honor the gods. Back to the kidnapping case, that night, Cheung left Keung's house with 38 million Hong Kong dollars. The next day, Keung called Cheung at 10 a.m., asking him to take 500 million first. When Cheung arrived, the money was already placed in the car. Cheung drove away with the vehicle. At 4 p.m. on the same day, he returned to Keung's house for the second time to collect the remaining 500 million Hong Kong dollars. After receiving the entire ransom, Cheung brought Victor and the driver to a hotel, owned by Keung. Before leaving, he said to Victor, "Please give my regards to your father, I am a big fan of his," and then he left. The largest banknote in Hong Kong is the $1,000 bill. $1 billion in cash could weigh up to 1 ton. Cheung took 35% of the total amount, approximately 380 million, while the remaining 65% he distributed to his gang members. Cheung handed most of his share to his wife, Maggie, who, as usual, spent the money on properties and luxury items. In September 1997, Cheung once again led his gang to kidnap the second richest person in Hong Kong, Walter Kwok. They kidnapped Walter while he was on his way to work, and the entire kidnapping process this time was much easier than anticipated. However, Walter Kwok proved to be much more difficult to negotiate with than Victor Lee. Walter was kidnapped and taken to a house that Cheung had previously rented. The kidnappers forced Walter to call his family and use their money to secure his release, but Walter firmly refused to contact his family, even lecturing the kidnappers. The kidnappers then began to torture him, binding his hands and feet and locking him in a wooden box that was only about 1 meter long. 2 days later, Walter could no longer endure the situation and agreed to call his family, informing them that he had been kidnapped. Once again, like before, Cheung went to Walter Kwok's house alone to negotiate, and they ultimately reached an agreement. Walter Kwok's family would provide 600 million Hong Kong dollars in cash within the next 3 days. In both kidnapping cases, Keung obtained more than 700 million Hong Kong dollars as his share, which was almost equivalent to 100 million US dollars. He gave a total of 150 million to his mother and grandmother and gave 250 million to Maggie. With the money from her husband, Maggie once again invested in purchasing houses, apartments, villas, luxury cars, and other lavish items, with all the assets bought registered in her own name. Cheung kept 300 million Hong Kong dollars for himself. However, this money quickly disappeared at the gambling table. His biggest loss in one night was 100 million Hong Kong dollars at the Lisboa casino in Macau. Heartbroken over this significant loss, Cheung, along with his associates, began to plan a robbery of the casino and intended to kidnap Stanley Ho, the owner of the Lisboa casino in Macau, but before that, he wanted to free his best friend from prison. On January 7, 1998, he purchased 818 pounds of explosives, 2,000 detonators, and 750 meters of wire from Guangdong, China. Cheung intended to blow up the prison and free his friend, Yi Jihuan. However, before they could act, the explosives he had prepared were seized by the Hong Kong police. On January 17, 1998, Cheung changed his name to Chen Qingwei and fled to Guangdong, China, with his gang members, deciding to hide in mainland China and return to Hong Kong once the case colder. But a week later, he was arrested by mainland Chinese police for the same offense, possession of 960 pounds of explosives. Clearly, this was not Cheung's first arrest, so he was not panicking at all and remained arrogant. When interrogated by the police, he maintained a relaxed demeanor, because he thought he would be deported to Hong Kong, and his wife would hire the best lawyer to free him, just like before. FYI, Hong Kong does not impose the death penalty, so Maggie worked hard to bring Cheung back and have him tried in Hong Kong. She contacted the media several times, but her public statements only captured temporary public attention and did not change anything. Since Cheung planned the crime in Guangdong, the mainland Chinese police had the right to prosecute him in China according to the applicable laws of that country. Moreover, all of his accomplices confessed to gain reduced sentences. 6 months later, more than 40 members of Cheung's gang, including several family members, were gradually arrested. All of Cheung's assets, as well as those of his wife and mother, were frozen by the Hong Kong government. However, Maggie had long been preparing for the worst-case scenario. She argued that she had not been involved in Cheung's crimes, and claimed that all her assets were obtained from her business profits. On November 4, 1998, after nearly 3 months of trial proceedings, Maggie and her mother-in-law successfully regained their assets. On the other hand, on November 12, 1998, Keung was sentenced to death. Maggie quickly sold all her properties, but no one knew how much money she managed to gather from the sale of her assets, some said she pocketed 500 million Hong Kong dollars, while others claimed she amassed 2 billion Hong Kong dollars. Since her husband's execution on December 5, 1998, Maggie reportedly left Hong Kong and lived in some country with her children, but no accurate information about her whereabouts has emerged. That concludes today's true crime story. Thank you for watching, and see you again in the next video from the Asian Crime Story channel.